The Columban Calendar, a special edition. 2012 marks the 90th edition of the Columban Calendar, which is well known for its traditional religious paintings and liturgical information. The first calendar was produced in 1923, the year Vegemite hit Victorian tastebuds. The iconic calendar has become a feature in homes to generations of Australians and New Zealanders, and is a major fundraiser for St Columbans Mission Society. As one of the Columban benefactors recently wrote, "I will be 90 years old in 2012, the same age as the calendar. I have been a widow for 23 years, and I never feel lonely or alone when I look at my calendar, which takes pride of place on my living room wall." This remark is just one of many which Columbans receive each year. As a way of saying thank you for being part of the 90th edition, Columbans have produced this beautiful DVD, which gives a brief explanation of each painting included in the 2012 calendar. The following explanations have been compiled by Claire Renken, well-known art historian and lecturer at Yarra Theological Union. The front cover: Virgin and Child with Angels by Gozzoli, 1420 to 1497. The Virgin and Child are enclosed by alternating pairs of seraphim and cherubim. Within her fur-lined mantle, the Virgin gently holds her Son. Christ appears not to be aware of his mother's protective embrace. His attention is directed out of the space of the painting. Gozzoli includes a clue to explain both Christ and his mother's expressions of introspection, the Virgin, and preoccupation, the Child. Christ holds in his left hand a tiny, brightly coloured gold finch. Symbolically, this bird recalls the crucifixion, for legend told how it received the bright splash of red on its breast when it flew past Christ hanging on the cross. Christ's gesture of grasping the goldfinch reminds us of his future passion. Similarly, Mary's downcast gaze suggests her acknowledgement of the suffering her only child will embrace. January. Madonna and Saints by Filippino Lippi, 1457 to 1504. Filippino Lippi's altarpiece for the chapel of a wealthy Florentine merchant, Tanay di Nelli, and his wife Nanni, invites us into a scene pulsating with life and devotion. The donors kneel before the Virgin and Child in poses which express their prayer-filled thoughts. St. Martin on our left and St. Catherine of Alexandria perform their mediating role by introducing the earthly couple to the Virgin and Child. Christ's attention is drawn to the young John the Baptist, who kneels at the foot of the Virgin's throne. John's reed cross distracts the Christ child, who reaches out to grasp the tip. This playful gesture evokes the mystery of Christ's incarnation, for this is the God who will die on the cross. Lippi further dramatizes vulnerability in the scene glimpsed at right through the arcade. We see a family group at the entrance to a contemporary 15th century Florentine palace. The man bends down to farewell his child. The father and daughter tenderly embrace. Behind the group, a horse lies ready for a journey. In the Renaissance, people found meaning in the idea of life as a journey. Then as now, people identify with Christ and the saints, who, like us, journey towards our Heavenly Father. February. Detail from the Presentation in the Temple by Giotto, 1266 to 1336. Giotto, the great Florentine 14th century master, introduced a new emotional realism into painting. The scene of the presentation of Christ in the temple unfolds before us with drama. 6 figures stand in front of the temple, which is suggested by the large stone canopy. The spare setting allows us to focus on the interactions between the figures at the center of the story, the Virgin, Christ, and the priest, Simeon. The outstretched hands of the mother intersect with the searching arm of her child. Jesus faces towards us, though his gaze falls upon the face of the aged Simeon. Giotto employs the language of gesture and expression to suggest complex emotional and spiritual meanings. Mary's open hands simultaneously release and await the return of her child, while Simeon's covered hands symbolize his reverence for Christ the Messiah. March. Detail from the Annunciation by Costa Conti, after Andrea del Sarto. The theme of the Annunciation in Christian art has a rich tradition. Artists employed a variety of symbols to evoke the mystery of Mary's acceptance of God's invitation to become the Mother of God. This painting, copied after the Florentine master Andrea del Sarto's masterpiece, includes several startling features. Unusually, Gabriel appears before the Virgin in the company of two angels. Mary turns almost hesitantly in response to the archangel's greeting. She stands poised in front of a grand classical facade, whose monumentality enhances her dignified figure. In her hand, the Virgin marks her place in her book. Tradition taught that Mary was reading the prophet Isaiah, "Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a child." Mystery lies at the heart of this promise of God made man. Symbols in the foreground hint at the paradox of Christ's incarnation. The cloud beneath the angel's feet evokes heaven, and the red and white roses evoke Christ's life on earth. April. Detail from the Lamentation over the Dead Christ by Fra Angelico, 1387 to 1455. Fra Angelico, artist and Dominican friar, frescoed the interior of the cells for the novices and friars of the Dominican convent of San Marco, Florence. Every cell depicted a scene from the life of Christ. Here, in cell 2, we see the Lamentation, which imaginatively engages with the events surrounding the Passion. We look down upon Christ's lifeless body as Mary, his mother, John the Evangelist, Mary Magdalene, and the other Mary lament their son, friend, and teacher. Each kneeling figure's loving touch of Christ's body expresses an intimate communion with him and with each other. St. Dominic gazes down at the sorrowful scene, reminding us that we are all witnesses to the timeless reality of Christ's mission. May. The upper section from Pentecost from the Maesta by Duccio, around 1260 to 1318. Duccio's sublime masterpiece is the double-sided altarpiece he painted for the high altar of Siena's cathedral. This multi-panelled painting depicts scenes from the lives of Christ and the Virgin. In the scene of Pentecost, Duccio depicts the apostles gathered together as narrated in Luke Acts 2. Small tongues of fire rest upon each figure's heads, signs of the presence of the Holy Spirit. The Virgin is the focus of the apostles and the viewer's gaze. She alone wears a mantle highlighted with gold leaf, the precious material a symbolic expression of her status as Mother of God and figure of the Church. The apostles turn towards her radiant, anchoring presence. Her outstretched hands both receive and send forth the breath of life. June. Detail from the Lamentation over the Dead Christ by Sandro Botticelli, 1445 to 1510. This detail of St. Peter from Botticelli's painting of the Lamentation of Christ portrays him in an attitude of introspection. Various visual clues help us recognize the saint, including the blue tunic and yellow mantle St. Peter traditionally wears. However, it is his familiar attribute, the keys, one gold, the other silver, which he holds in his left hand, that proclaim the saint's identity and authority. Although the Gospels do not mention Peter's presence at the crucifixion, by including him in this scene of the Lamentation, Botticelli poses a challenging question to the viewer. How can we be present to Christ's suffering in our lives? July. The upper section of Appearance on the Sea of Galilee from the Maester by Duccio, circa 1260 to 1318. The post-resurrection scene of Christ's appearance to the apostles on Lake Tiberias has its source in John chapter 21, verses 1 to 8. Duccio evokes the astonished reactions of the disciples as they glimpse the risen Christ. Shock registers on the faces of those in the boat who have seen Christ. Duccio imagines this dramatic episode with a minimum of narrative detail. Sea and land are depicted as symbolic forms. Peter's encounter with Christ stretches through the awe-filled space between them. Christ's intent gaze and beckoning gesture draw Peter towards him and the shore. Duccio reveals in this moment of Peter's recognition of the risen Christ how faith transforms the failures of the past and renews all things. August. Detail from The Transfiguration by Fra Angelico, 1387 to 1455. Fra Angelico's Transfiguration has been acclaimed as one of the friar artist's greatest masterpieces. Like the fresco of the Lamentation, this work also formed part of the decorative program of the cells in the Dominican convent of San Marco, Florence. Christ dominates the scene. His towering figure stands on a rocky platform which recalls the mountain setting traditionally identified as Mount Tabor. At Christ's feet, Peter, James, and John expressed the awe that filled them when Jesus revealed his divine nature to his companions. Peter turns his back on the blinding vision, while James shields his eyes. Only John ventures a glimpse of the radiant Christ. Subtle gradations of light and colour create the energy-filled space emanating like a force field from Christ. His outstretched arms pierce the mandorla-shaped halo. In this gesture, Christ manifests the majesty of the Creator and pathos of the crucified. September. St Matthew and the Angel by Caravaggio, 1571 to 1610. Caravaggio portrays a swirling vortex of flesh and fabric. In this moment of divine inspiration, energy from above descends in the fury of revelation. A raking light sheds unsparing yet partial clarity on the encounter between St. Matthew and the angel. Through the jarring juxtapositions, Caravaggio confronts us with youth and age. The eloquence of the angel's speaking gestures contrasts with the awkward hesitancy of St. Matthew. In a profound spiritual insight, Caravaggio's St. Matthew is no polished scholar surrounded by the trappings of learning and the comforts of the scholar's study. Instead, this tax collector turned evangelist reveals through his ink-stained hands and searching gaze the tenacity of his devotion to Christ. Caravaggio's awkward St. Matthew reminds that God chooses the most unlikely candidates to be his intermediaries. October. Blessed Pope John Paul II, 1920 to 2005. Original photograph of Pope John Paul by John Casamento. Background photo of Bernini Colonnade, St. Peter's Square by Massimo Merlini. Enhanced artwork by Michel Vieira. The image of Pope John Paul II was taken by Melbourne photographer John Casamento during the Pope's visit to Australia in 1986. The photo has been imposed over the background of the Bernini Colonnade in St. Peter's Square, Rome. Karol Joseph Wojtyla was elected Pope on the 16th of October 1978, and he took the name of John Paul II. His pontificate was one of the longest in the history of the Church and lasted nearly 27 years. Driven by his pastoral solicitude for all churches, and by a sense of openness and charity to the entire human race, John Paul II exercised the Petrine ministry with a tireless missionary spirit. His love for young people brought him to establish the World Youth Days. The 19 World Youth Days celebrated during his pontificate brought together millions of young people from all over the world. John Paul II successfully encouraged dialogue with people of the Jewish faith and representatives of other religions. On April the 28th, Pope Benedict XVI announced that the normal 5-year waiting period before beginning the cause of beatification and canonization would be waived for John Paul II. Pope John Paul II was beatified and declared blessed on the 1st of May 2011. November. St. Stephen receiving the diaconate and distributing alms by Fra Angelico, 1387 to 1455. Towards the end of his life, Fra Angelico was called to Rome by the Pope Nicholas V to help decorate the papal palace. A small chapel known as the Cappella Niccolini is all that remains of the artist's work for the Pope. Scenes from the lives of the first martyrs, Saints Stephen and Lawrence, appear over 2 levels on 3 walls. The fresco reproduced here depicts 2 successive moments from the life of Stephen, as described in Luke Acts. On the left, the young deacon Stephen kneels to receive a chalice from St. Peter. The classically inspired architectural setting lends authority and dignity to the narrative. In the adjoining scene, we glimpse St. Stephen distributing alms to the poor and needy. The young mother and her child are dressed simply, as befits their straitened circumstances. Amongst the figures approaching St. Stephen, the child closest to us captures our attention. Through the confidence expressed in the child's trusting gesture, Fra Angelico urges us always as Christians to focus on the needs of the poor. December. Detail from the Adoration in the Forest, the Virgin adoring the Child with Saints John the Baptist and Bernard of Siena, by Filippo Lippi, 1406 to 1469. This painting, now in Berlin, was originally commissioned for the private chapel of the Medici in their Florentine palace. Fra Filippo Lippi places the scene of the Virgin adoring the Child in a setting that is neither familiar nor traditional. Instead, the artist invites us to contemplate the timeless meaning of Christ's incarnation. The darkly wooded landscape enclosing the figures, including St. John the Baptist and a monk, perhaps St. Bernard of Clairvaux, exudes a sombre mood. Amidst harsh, receding rock forms and barren terrain, the Christ child turns towards us. The child's nakedness evokes for us his vulnerability and innocence. The artist portrays the Virgin as a refined and elegant beauty. Her delicately modelled facial features, framed by the impossibly diaphanous veil which falls from her head, move us to identify with her mood of introspection. Lippi's vision of the Nativity reminds us that the face of Christ brings a light which dispels all darkness.